You know how people are obsessed with the like, don't tell me your dreams, don't tell me your drug trips.
I had a crazy, so I listened to, and I'm staying in New York, and I used to live here, and I love just walking around New York so much. I miss it. Just either doing it without listening to anything or listening to a podcast or music and just walking around. Like, it's just my greatest pleasure in life. It always, and I miss it so much because like I probably would rather look at buildings than at trees, to be perfectly honest. Like trees are great. No, I like both of them, but
you don't have to pick.
There's just a lot of visual stimulation here. And so I was walking around and I was listening to the very first episode of the podcast that you guys ever did.
Oh God.
Oh.
And I was listening to the part about the subject is supposed to know. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
The subject's supposed to know. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I listened to that and I thought a lot about that, or I didn't think about it. I thought about it, didn't think about it. And then so that night I had this dream, and like one of the great sort of nightmares of my like real life in reality is that this is going to sound so ridiculous, and you might want to take this out because people will just be like, who cares about this person? But my parents have a house on an island in Maine.
Nice.
And when I was a kid, they bought this house, and I was like, please do not buy. I was 12 or something. I was like, please do not buy this house. I hate this place so much. And if you buy this house, you will be drawing a line in the sand in our relationship. Like I was like, I'm not saying that's right, but I know what kind of person I am. And I can hold a grudge like you cannot imagine. And I just was like, I know I will hold a grudge forever. So they bought this place, and I did hold a grudge forever. It did indeed was kind of a line in the sand. But the reason I hated this place was because there was always something that you were supposed to know about something you weren't supposed to do. I mean, there were other reasons I hated it, which was this like preppy, like bullies everywhere. And like my family was sort of like PMC as opposed to like a little bit more like finance.
Yeah.
I was very conscious of like the class differential between people, even though I was very like aware of being like somewhat privileged, even at like 12 or whatever. But I was also like, we are not like, my dad's not like a finance guy, you know? And I just felt like very much like we didn't know the social roles. And then we also just didn't know like the rules. So so after this thing, I had this dream after having listened to the subject's supposed to know thing that night. I had this dream that I was on an island in Maine, and I was driving, and it was my old Toyota Yaris, which is very, very small.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a bridge, and at the end, I went over this small bridge, and at the end of the bridge, it was all like boarded up and you couldn't get off of it. But it was in this weird way where I was like, maybe I can maneuver around it. But then I realized that I couldn't. And I finally like abandoned my car. And then I was like walking around with the people that were in the car with me. I had like passengers with me asking like how I was supposed to get off this bridge. And no one would tell me. I thought it was just like incidental that they'd closed it down, or like that it was broken or something. And then I found out that it had been closed for a month because the people that like it was actually privately owned. And they had decided that you couldn't use it anymore. You're supposed to go around the other way. And like, I remember and there was like a woman who owned the bridge, like sitting at the top of this like green hill in like this canvas, like white chair, like the kind of chair that you get like a design within reach. That'd be like $4,000 or something. And she's wearing like a seersucker suit or something. She looked like Lauren Hutton or something, but like in 1975. And she's just like sitting there, and I'm walking up to her, and I want to tell her that like my car is trapped, and like I didn't know, and I keep going, I didn't know. Like I would not have gone over this bridge if I had known that I wasn't supposed to, but I could not get the words out. Like I literally could not get the words out of my mouth. And then I think I woke up. So anyway,
that's an incredible dream. I have never understood people who don't want to hear other people's dreams or other people's psychedelic experiences. Cause I know that's like a group of people who's like, just don't tell me that stuff. But to me, I'm like, just like, I want to mainline that.
I feel like there's a way that people can describe their dreams sometimes, though, that I mean, I don't know how interesting that was or wasn't. And I was very conscious of the fact that I was telling it, I was like, try to hit the salient points, try to be specific. Because I feel like people will tell dreams in this way that can be really quite boring. And that may have been boring as well, but like it can just be really boring.
I don't know. I thought it was a good dream. I mean, like, part of what's so cool about dreams is they have this kind of, even if we don't know what like they mean, we get the sense that they're meaningful. Like there's some sort of grammar,
Yeah.
there's some sort of like, and that has it,
Yeah.
right? There's this
Yeah.
the troll above the bridge who's also the gatekeeper. Like there's all this stuff going on there.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
a little
yeah.
like before the law
Yeah,
happening there.
it's a little Kafka coded.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. It was a pretty intense dream. I was so happy though. I just love when you wake up and you're like, oh, my car's not behind my car's not like blocked in by a bunch of, 2x4s. Like, that's great. Now I don't know, it makes you happy.
I like listening to other people's dreams in general. I like yours was particularly excellent. Other people's drug stories are really hit or miss. Particularly, I may have just, there's a period of time when I was reading a lot of them and I was hearing a lot of them, and particularly when the stories are like people trying to express the ineffable. I mean, there's a reason it's called the ineffable, right? They can't effing do it, and it's all the same. But I do think the stories that I really liked were the stories people would tell about doing drugs, or like people who were there and weren't necessarily tripping as hard, or just like that kind of stuff. I love, I'll consume 1 million of those. Those are great.
Yeah. I mean, I think like relationships are more interesting. You mean like the relationships between the people that are doing the drugs?
Or also if someone does something completely unhinged, that can also be very fun. I mean, obviously that excluding the tragic and terrible ones here, but people.
Speaking of that, at the retreat that I went to, this got cut out of the piece. Although I would say that I'm sure it was cut out for a good reason. This is Lisa Boris, did a very good job editing it.
She's wonderful, yeah.
But one of the things that was cut out of the piece was somebody at the ayahuasca center just like got up from tripping fucking balls and ran out into the jungle.
Oh, shit.
And they didn't find them for like 24 hours.
Shit.
Oh, my God.
And apparently this happens sometimes. And I was just like, I knew I was way too lazy to do something like that. Like they told me about it before I took the drug, and I was like, my subconscious would never do that. Like it would just be like way too lazy.
You're listening to Ordinary Unhappiness, a podcast about psychoanalysis, politics, pop culture, and the ways we suffer now. I'm Abby Kluchin.
I'm Carlos Castaneda. No, wait, I'm Patrick Blanchfield. Sorry, I'm Patrick Blanchfield.
No, I kind of liked that. Okay. And today I am like fucking over the moon to introduce Sarah Miller, who has been one of my favorite writers for such a long time. Sarah Miller lives in Nevada City, California, and writes for N+1, TheNewYorker.com, ParisReview.com, and most regularly at her Substack, The Real Sarah Miller. She's hilarious and wonderful, and we are so excited to talk to her about her recent long-form piece, Pirates of the Ayahuasca, which just came out in issue 50 of N+1. Sarah, welcome.
Hello. I'm very happy to be here. I'm a big fan of the podcast. I listen to it all the time, and I'm also very excited to be in N+1 since I started out writing for like a Men's Health, and so I was like, wow, I really made it. I'm a public intellectual now. So.
and I should say, just to mirror what Abby is saying, that I love your work as well. Abby introduced me to it, and I've been reading it regularly over the years. And I loved your piece in N+1 about, well, this experience that we're going to talk about, or this experience of experiences. I don't know. We get meta probably pretty quick, but I want to commend people to your Substack and really also encourage them to support N+1 now more than ever.
So let's get into it. Sarah, can you walk us through the origins of this piece? It's a really remarkable essay. It's funny, it's wise, it's about ayahuasca and about climate change and depression and psychedelic tourism. So for those of our listeners who have not read it yet, can you talk a little bit about what led you to undertake your trip to Peru and a little bit about what it was like?
Yeah. So I live in the foothills in Nevada City, California, and we had like an incredibly bad couple of fire seasons. There was a pretty long drought, and then there's a couple summers where the sky was just gray all the time, and we like barely saw the sun, and it was so hard to deal with. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Take your time.
I had lived in that part of the world for a couple of years before the fires really got intense, and it happened really fast. And I was really, really scared. I was never in any like personal danger, which actually seemed to be very important to people. Like they would be like, I don't know, like it seemed like that if you hadn't actually like run for your life, then like you couldn't be scared or you couldn't be upset or something. And like there, in like I think the Paradise Fire was 2018, maybe 2019, and that was about maybe 60 miles away as the crow flies, and that Paradise just like burned up like in I think under an hour or something, and people were people just like burned to death in their homes, and and then there was this day where the sun disappeared, which happened all over the West Coast. I just got so depressed, and at the same time I was writing about climate change, which I actually don't really do anymore, because I actually wrote a piece for my Substack called like all the right words about climate have already been said, because I was just like, I don't really know what the fuck else we're supposed to say about this shit anymore. Like we know what's happening, and anyway, I just sort of was like, I just was like, oh my God, it's too late. And I started to really want to like commit suicide, but I really didn't want to commit suicide. And I also felt very like alienated from people, because I just felt like I felt this like real responsibility slash like guilt about like being able to sort of be there for other people. And then all this guilt about like, people would just say stuff like, oh, it's so much worse, in Bangladesh, or it's so much worse in these islands in the Pacific that are disappearing, or it's so much worse for people who don't have homes and all this stuff. And I was like, stuff that I knew. I wasn't like, oh, I don't agree with that. I mean, I think it's like, I think you'd have to be, living under a rock to not know that, climate change and everything in the world that's bad, fascism, all this stuff affects people with like less resources more quickly than it affects other people. But like, I also was like, well, this is my life, and it's really, I'm not enjoying it. So then my partner at the time heard somebody talking on a podcast about ayahuasca and he was like a leftist. He wasn't exactly kind of in the exact same kind of tradition that I didn't agree with like everything that he said about the world, but he definitely was like somebody who knew that we were in extreme eco crisis, and didn't have any illusions about that. And he had taken ayahuasca, and he had been doing it for years and years. And he had also been very sick, physically sick, and it had helped. I didn't really have any like physical problems other than like getting older, but and my knee hurting. But he seemed to have found like a great deal of comfort in it and a sense of this thing beyond himself. And I just was like, I just was desperate. I was like, I've dabbled in, like, I took acid in college, I've taken mushrooms, but I'm like your basic like cocktail drinker. Like, I'm also, and I do, I've done yoga and those things, but I didn't grow up religious or I'm not like a believer.
Yeah.
And I'm also very skeptical of anything sort of hippie, whatever. Like, I don't know. But I'm also ambivalent. I'm also very drawn. I've always been sort of repelled and drawn to like the other side. It's like a huge feature of my life, I would say. So my partner listened to this, and then I listened to this podcast, and I just decided to go. Like I was like full steam ahead. I'm gonna go to Peru and do ayahuasca with this shaman that he did it with, because I was like, I need to find a way to like want to be alive, because I'm 50 or whatever I was, 51, I don't know. And I don't want to kill myself. And I don't want to keep on being like so incredibly miserable.
Yeah.
So
as you're saying what you're saying, I find myself sort of connecting in new light a bunch of themes that I think we're going to talk about in the piece, but that I kind of want to put on the table almost immediately here in certain terms. And I don't want to impose on your experience. Tell me if these things work, right, as analogies. The first thing that leaps out to my mind is the properly apocalyptic horror, not just of a world being on fire, but of not seeing the fucking sun, right? I mean, we've been in some places where we've gotten, both on the East Coast, we've gotten Canadian wildfires across country, and I've been, in the Bay Area when some things have gone down like that. And it is one of those things that even if you know it's going to happen, even if it is I'm thinking of like the eclipse that we had, right? Like, even if you know when it's going to happen, it still does something to you in some sort of primal way. And I'm not trying to make apostrophize this like as somehow like quote unquote exotic or outlandish or primitive in any sense. I'm just like, this thing that is literally the source of illumination in the world is gone. And for a brief moment, and now I'm thinking even of a situation in which like I knew it was coming. I had the glasses, right? I'm like, the coldness that comes over the world and the way the shadows start to change, it feels like the end of the world. And I could understand how someone might be, let me just say that like, though I've read a lot about like indigenous practices of sacrifice vis-a-vis the sun, they somehow made more sense to me, or at least I could understand myself being like plunged into a chaos of like something, I have to do something very drastic in order to bring this fucking thing back. Right. That was legible to me. But also what I'm trying to say here too, is this theme of like, this feeling of like something horrible and collective happening that is properly like a revelation of something. And how that kind of, you reach for new coordinates, right? It's a trippy, dislocating experience. The second thing I wanted to say, and here I can just speak from my own experiences, writing about sort of different things, but writing about like gun violence, which I've done for 2 decades now, right? At a certain point, I found that being steeped in and sensitized to that issue in the way that I was made it impossible for me to get it out of my mind, even when I didn't think I was thinking about it. And I'm not just talking about like reflexively checking exits or, like thinking, noticing who's fucking carrying in public places because people are more obvious about it than you might think. But even on the level of having conversations with people, and they'd ask me what I was doing, what I was writing about, what I was thinking about. And my immediately having ready at hand a whole series of qualifications, observations, and many of which ramified on the level of like, well, do I get to be having these feelings? Do I get to be thinking about this, right? Well, I write about this, but I don't have to live it, right? I've had guns pointed at me. I've been in situations where, gun violence is proximate, but I've never been shot, God, thank God, right? So like, I was having these moments like, do I get to have these feelings, right? How proximate am I to this? And I remember just one moment in particular that kind of ties a bow on this, if you don't mind. Just,
no, please.
Abby, you remember this? We were at an equinox party, actually. It was like a solstice party, wasn't it? That was
Equinox is a gym.
Sorry, no, yeah, but not the gym, not the goth sex gym. It was a solstice thing. Some people near us who have a bunch of land do this sort of.
Oh, yeah, I didn't go to this.
Yeah, you weren't there. Okay, yeah. It was a solstice party, and
it was a bonfire.
And all these people from like the surrounding rural, areas, all these little hippie towns get together, and they've been collecting shipping pallets for the better part of the year. And then in the cold, they create this enormous bonfire. And it was really fun. People were playing music. Dan brought his ukulele. Like, we're all sort of hanging out. We're all smoking weed. I'm a little too high for it. I soon realized I was a little way too high for what was about to happen. But they started throwing in bamboo right? And you know how bamboo kind of segments in these little things and water gets trapped. So these kids are throwing sticks of bamboo. And the sound the bamboo makes when it explodes in the fire sounds exactly like a 40 caliber round going off. Like it has a little sort of sharp snap. And I wanted to jump out of my skin. It was untenable. Like part of me wanted to actually pull the kids away from the fire because somehow I thought that they were going to get hurt. Again, I'm not trying to tell my drug story. I'm just saying that it wasn't also just like the experiential thing. It was all these other things layering up. And this sense of like, what does it mean that I'm feeling this despite the fact that I know it doesn't affect me concretely? Right? In what way does like this thing that I understand to be a trauma that is out there relate to the distress that I am feeling? Like, do I get to have this experience? And how do I deal with the fact that I'm still having this kind of experience in relation to this thing? It was vertiginous shit. And I just wanted to put those terms on the table and mirror what you said back to you. And thank you for saying it.
Patrick, while you were talking, you made me think of another one of Sarah's pieces that has been particularly memorable for me, which it was when you were writing about climate change, the Miami piece, which is also in very like classic Sarah Miller fashion. It's like deadly serious and also like extremely funny to like allow you to process the horror. But then there's also this moment which I feel like gets to this question of like, well, this is happening to me, but like, do I get to have this feeling? And you say, and here I'm quoting, "We work, and at the end of the day, if we think at all we have time to think about is that we are cowards, or before the thought comes, to escape it. Raise your hand if you have never hoped you will die before you have to thoroughly disrupt your own life for the lives of those who will live after you are dead." I just wanted to throw that in there because I have sat with that for a long time. And I think it crystallizes, and that's a piece you wrote long before Pirates of the Ayahuasca, that crystallizes like a lot of the preoccupations that I think we're talking about in your writing, and that also in your experience that led you to this like literal series of trips.
It's funny. When I was looking over your questions earlier, something I didn't say when I was talking, because I wrote down a bunch of stuff, was I forgot that I'd written that raise your hand if whatever thing. I'm just like, oh, I wrote that. I'm like, that's good. No, I'm just kidding.
It is. It's
good.
haunting. Yeah.
But I really, one of the things that annoys me, so not just annoys me, I mean, it's a huge understatement, about the like, I do even this is like so important to me. I'm probably going to mention it a million times in a really psychoanalytically suspicious way, but I think it's weird. I do think the whole like notion that what's happening, the chiding about like, well, this is happening so much faster in the global south, or this is, imagine if you were poor. I do feel like that is like the sort of liberal way of being sympathetic and like signifying like sympathy and care about climate change while telling like yourself that it's not going to happen to you. So it's like this, it's coded as like, if you're not like appropriately like more concerned with other people than you are with yourself, then you're a bad person. But it's also this thing that allows people to think that this isn't going to happen to them. Like, people are always like, what about the world for our grandchildren? And I'm like, your grandchildren? Are you fucking high? You think this is going to happen to your grandchildren? Like, or like, what about, I don't know. And I'm just like, I don't know. I was like, do you think your children are going to have children? Like because that's like, I mean, they may or they may not. I'm extremely pessimistic, and it's not like based on just like, I don't know. I'm like pessimistic based on like science that I've read. In terms, Patrick was talking about like feelings that you're allowed to have or not have. The day that the sun disappeared, a friend of mine came over, and she's older than I am. I'm not sure that really matters, but she was really upset. And for some reason, like I had sort of like sat down in a corner and like cried for an hour. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to go on with things. And I just sort of like, and so she called me. She was like, I'm just driving around. I'm so freaked out. And she came over And I was like, I am going to act normal for this person. Like, she needs somebody to act normal, and I'm going to act normal. And I got to say, that is not usually me, but I was like, I'm going to act normal. And so she came over and I made her some tea, and I was just like, it's okay. I was like, it's going to cool down tomorrow. It's going to rain in a couple of days. Like, we will be swimming in the lake soon. And all these things were true, like,
yeah.
That's what's like. I remember after that, there was a heat wave in Portland or something like that. And like all these like people I don't necessarily know personally, we're just like, we're in our house. We're just like sitting in the bathroom. It's so hot out. We're just like getting in and out of the cold bathtub or whatever. And I was like, I just want you guys to remember that you're going to have normal days again. Like, you're going to go outside. You're going to go to the river. You're going to like walk to the store. Like, I was just like, this is awful. And this is like a problem that's, climate change is like a real thing, but like, you're going to have a fun day again. And so I was trying to do that for my friend. And then I was writing an essay about swimming, and I included this part in the essay about swimming, just like a paragraph about this having happened to me. Because this is my friend that I go swimming with, and I thought it was like a sweet illustration of our friendship. And also, like, I really love swimming because it's just like this reminder that like I'm alive, like even if the world is dying around me and I can see it, like even from the lake, I can see like the forest dying in front of me. And it's so hard for me to like not see it. Like my brother's brother-in-law was like, he's like, why you wouldn't be so depressed if you didn't read the news? And I was like, I never read the news. Like, I seriously never read the news. I was like, but I wake up in the morning and like, I drive to the store and like the trees are brown, like what am I supposed to do? Anyway, so I wrote this thing about this happening with me and my friend in this essay, and it was cut. And like every time that I wrote about like these feelings I had in for anything like another publication, and it wasn't like a super long paragraph, it was like short, and I told the story very quickly, but it was cut. And then I told a friend of mine, who's like a very good friend of mine, about feeling like, I was like, yeah, I feel like I sort of died on the day the sun disappeared. And now I'm sort of like walking around in like a reanimated like corpse or something. This is like 2 years later. I just like, I just am not, I haven't like fully inhabited myself, I feel like, since that day. And he like he was like, oh God, that's such a like cliche of I think he basically was like sort of accusing me of being like, who's that person that I can't stand? That's Alan Watts or something. Like, I don't know. Like, I was just being some kind of like, hey man, like Carlos Castaneda type. I don't know, that kind of like, I'm already dead, or I've never even read Carlos Castaneda, but just
You
like
can
sort of
skip
this
it.
like male, like, hey, I'm dead, but like we're all dead already, or like Shantaram or some shit like that, And so I just felt so much like what you were saying about like the bonfire, and the bamboo. I just felt like so much, almost the worst part of it was, in some ways, I have all these feelings and I do not know what I'm supposed to do with them because they are completely inappropriate. And I also got that, like, in the sense that we live we live in a society, I was like, we have to keep making money. For one, I mean, you can just stop right fucking there. Like, we have to keep making money, and it takes a lot of energy. And like, what am I supposed to do? I have to keep going.
One thing I'm noticing again, and I really love about your work, right, is that it's capable of both attending to the thing in question, right, the propositional topic of the piece. It's about climate change. It's about real estate. It's about drugs. But also attending to the experiences of other people in it in a way that doesn't feel like they're just reduced to a caricature or a type or a comic trope or whatever. And also in a subtle, elegant, restrained, and I think deeply ethical way, mobilizing what you yourself are encountering and thinking through. And I think that's particularly important, both in this piece, but also in general, in light of what I think you diagnosed very astutely just a minute ago, vis-a-vis how so much of modern life, in a way that seems super added on the normal existential concerns of being mortal and the problem of other minds and what can we share or not share, and we're all bound towards death, et cetera, is about gainsaying feeling or policing the feelings in others, or having these sort of strange, again, you're thinking the editor or the person working that bridge who's like, you can't quite say this, right? Or don't put yourself in this. And what's always so fucked up about that, and maybe we can trope this as like different kinds of like ego preoccupation when we start talking about drugs more specifically, is that it is a kind of, in its ostensible clarity of like, well, no, this story isn't about you. Or rather, don't make it about this other thing. Oftentimes what that is centering is the position of the person doing the editing or the censorship. Right. And oftentimes what they're worried about is not about your feelings, but about theirs, or their inability to contain what your having feelings will do to them. And again, part of what I love about your work and the way that it both makes things that are distant seem nearer and makes things that are nearer seem uncannily present. And that is, I think, deeply opposed to what people, and I'm thinking of Watts, I'm also thinking of Carlos Castaneda, right? Like a lot of these sort of figures who are actually incredibly dark. For people who just, I'll say it's right up front since we made a couple jokes about him. Google what happened to the women in Carlos Castaneda's life and you'll like nightmare shit, right? But in toggling between the distant and the near, I think something emerges from that, right? And I'm not just meaning in the sense that like, I don't know, to go back to the sun, right? And like the violence of that experience, right? Of, it's not just like saying abstractly or even like with in a kind of anecdotal way that like seeing the sun disappear makes me on the one hand think about how like, you know, maybe on this like the top of a ziggurat in Teotihuacan I'd stick an obsidian knife in someone's chest, but also how like, you know, actually there's a ton of sacrifice that happens under capitalism and that like the sun's going down on all sorts of people in other ways, and there are people who never get to see the sun stateside in cells, etc. Like, but that it also involves this kind of attention to the specific people in your life. And to tie or that you're encountering as you do a story, and to tie a bow on this, what you describe in terms of essentially marshaling your own resources in the face of overwhelming experience, or rather experience that kind of overwhelms in a way that other types of experience we habituate away from being overwhelmed by, and essentially trip sitting for other people as they start to experience climate disaster as like a nightmare trip, feels to both thematize and speak to the part of what I love in your work, but also what I think is ethically at stake in this type of discussion, right? Like, how do we both acknowledge the abstract? How do we acknowledge the distant other? But also, how do we think about how that relates to our own relationship to ourselves, our self-understanding, and our immediate ethical, but also just like workaday continuing to live obligations to one another and the people around us, specifically in the moment.
That's kind of what I heard from the guy on the podcast that made me want to do ayahuasca. I mean, I couldn't say that he said everything that you just said, but I got the sense from him that it was sort of allowing him to have his feelings, and then allowing him to handle the fact that other people couldn't handle his feelings, and then allowing him to maybe move forward in a way where he could be a person that could listen to other people's feelings. You know, I think the word that we use on the West Coast is hold space, which I refuse. I refuse to actually use except for in parentheses. But yeah, that was what I heard. What you just said was like sort of what I heard from him that I was like, maybe that's a way that ayahuasca could help me become somebody who could contain what you're talking about, if I understood you correctly.
Can I ask you a little bit about your trip to Peru and about your experience drinking ayahuasca?
Yeah.
And I also want to like ask you, you know, because of the preoccupations of this show, is, you know, about what it was like to work with this shaman. And I do want to read for our listeners this line in which you worry that, quote, developing a terror toward the shaman was just normal ayahuasca transference 101 shit.
I forgot that I wrote that too, even though I put that words. Yeah, so you do this. I went there for 2 weeks, and you drink the ayahuasca Mondays and Tuesdays, and then Thursdays and Fridays, and then you have like the weekends and Wednesdays off. Also, I will also just say as a side note, like a lot of my article is like a fish out of water story, and like also just me dealing with the mechanics of getting to the place and how weird that was. So the ayahuasca drinking is kind of just part of it, but I do just kind of like want to set up like what kind of person I am, I guess, before I get there, and like what it takes to get there. Like also like the annoyances and also like the pleasures, I guess, of this like drug, seeker culture. But so you drink this stuff like 4 out of the 7 days, and it's this really thick, I don't know, it's like the consistency of like baba ganoush maybe, and but like much less delicious. And
Ugh.
it's a little bit, and that you drink it, it's less thick than baba ganoush. And you drink it, and you do it in this hut called a maloka, and everybody's like in a circle, and then the shamans, there's like this sort of head shaman dude who I called Ignacio in the story, and then there's 2 other shamans, and they sing these songs called Icaros. They're sort of meant to like get into your body and cleanse you of your particular issues, which you have met with like a facilitator about and had this short, it's like somewhat like therapy, but much more direct. Like they don't want to know the why. So you just go in there and you're like, hey, I have like, my parents got divorced when I was 10. And this isn't true for me, but whatever. My parents got divorced when I was 10. I have body dysmorphia. I'm a cocaine addict, and I'm afraid of cats. I don't know, whatever, and you list, and then they, and they've heard like everything. So like, for example, like I started talking about like climate change and probably like crime and fascism or whatever. And they're just like, they're like fear of wars. Like they just write down like fear of wars.
You got like a DSM thing going? That's hilarious.
Yeah, they're like fear of wars, and then they're like deprimida de la clima or something. Which is like, and I think they've like heard everything, Or you can be like, even if you're like, I want to pee on strangers, like I've probably fucking heard it, And they sing these specific songs about them. And the songs are in a mixture of Spanish and Shipibo, which is the indigenous language of, I think, that region of Peru, which is like close to Iquitos. And they sing these songs, and that's sort of, and then you're on this drug. And that is supposed to heal you. And I don't have, people, I'm not saying that like, yeah, and then they sing the song, and then they have these drugs, and it's supposed to heal you. I am not saying that in like a, oh my God, that's so stupid kind of way. I'm just saying like, that's the mechanism, that the way that it works.
Yeah, could I just one question for you? And this is actually it's a question. So I have a question for you that came from a clinician who I admire deeply, who I was just talking to about your article.
Yeah.
And he noted that one thing that's sort of like a barrier to pharmaceutical adoption of substances like ayahuasca is the difficulty of like doing a double blind trial.
Yeah.
Right. Like both because, a person kind of knows when they're about to get hit with a hallucinogen, but also because is this other stuff that you've been describing around it, namely the ritual aspect, the fact that there's travel involved, the fact that you have to go to a different country.
Yeah. Right.
And I was just wondering, you said in passing that you were both like excited in anticipation, but also kind of annoyed by the context here. How much did that experience of anticipation or feeling special or feeling annoyed in some way play into your going into it, at least?
Well, I don't think I expected to be so annoyed by it, but there was the person running the center who ended up getting like fired while I was there was really not good at their job. So that's sort of one element of it that's a wild card, right? And I think that like this place is being run probably way better now. And also like I would, just as an aside, if somebody wanted to go to Peru and do this, I might recommend going on like a facilitated trip.
Yeah.
So there's that. And I went by myself and whatever, which it wasn't dangerous. I mean, it wasn't, people like, oh my God, you're going to Peru by yourself. And I was just like, I mean, sure. Like, what? I don't think anything terrible is going to happen to me going to Peru by myself. But I think at the end of the piece, I said something like, I went all the way to Peru just to like take drugs and realize how embarrassed I was that I'd gone all the way to Peru. Which I feel like is such a, I don't know. I feel like that is kind of the experience of being like I feel like that's so much like the experience often of being like a semi privileged or privilege. I don't know how to quantify myself at this point in time of our disintegrating economy and all of that. It's just like everything you do is like you do it because you want to do it and you think it'll be fun, but then it was also like the stupidest thing that you ever did in your life. I don't know if you guys have that experience of being alive, but I'm just always like, what am I doing here? Like every single thing that I do, I'm like, what the fuck am I doing here? You guys are like,
no, it does.
No.
I was actually thinking like this really comes through in when I was a teenager, I became really, really obsessed with reading books about psychedelic experience.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I revisited after reading your piece was Huxley's The Doors of Perception, which like when I was 16, which was also how old I was the first time I took psychedelics, is like, this is like a Sarah Miller essay. This is not The Doors of Perception. Like, you're not like, I have experienced suchness and I'm like back to tell you about it and to proselytize about it. And like, guess what? We're all made of stars.
I would love it if that happened to me. Like, that would be so great if I became that person.
It's like one of the funniest fucking things that happens in the essay. And I mean, I want to read a little bit from it in a minute, but like, there is an earnestness, like almost despite yourself, I think, where you're just like, I need a thing. I need a thing in order to go on. Yeah. And so like, I am taking a physical trip and then I'm taking a number of psychedelic trips in the pursuit of like, is it healing? Is it knowledge? Is it wisdom? And then like, there's also this like, one of the things that psychedelics do and that so many people have, William James writes about this, Huxley writes about it, is like ego death, right? Like you lose yourself.
Yeah,
and like you never lose yourself in this essay, although you have these horrible experiences. I mean, this is one of the things, like when you recount these ayahuasca experiences, you're like, instead of having this sensation, which is like so attested in, both narrative accounts of psychedelic experiences, but also like if you go and read recent scientific and or like psychoanalytic writing, like scholarship, it's like, about the lowering of ego boundaries, often in order for change to be possible. And so like you're dealing with the sun being blotted out and late capitalism and the disappearance of all of these things that are precious in terms of like meaning making and the ability to like exist with any modicum of joy on this planet. And then you have hallucinations for 2 weeks about capitalism and climate change. And I want to read a couple of these for people to hear. Because like, as Sarah said, the actual like trip reports are not like in some ways the heart of the essay, but they are really important. And I do want to see if we can talk about it. So I'm going to kind of skip through and read a couple of things. So quote, I began to have a series of journeys that felt personalized, as if the plant spirits had heard my list of problems to clean. I saw the outline of the Americas from space. North America was belching out strands of fat pearls. Diamonds, gold and silver coins, swimming pools, cars, high-end watches, like the whole landmass was a slot machine with thousands of volcano-sized receptacles. The coastline was rimmed with mounted machine guns, thousands of them pointing outward. South America was made of mud, and I could see all layers of earth and the bones and skulls in it. The raised line of the Andes was not mountains, but enormous fountains of blood. I also saw fat, cylindrical pink creatures with small eyes. Why don't I get to see anything fun, I said. Why is everyone else solving family trauma or doing the two-step with purple jaguars, and every night I just see that? I'm moving further down. My 6th ceremony was the worst. As the drug kicked in, I had a vision of a reality where I had written an article about this place, which had been created to take money from Westerners to punish us for being killers or just douchebags. It was then staffed with people like Kara and the guy who couldn't talk to encourage us to go insane faster. The ayahuasca was extra potent, and we were all going to lose our minds and spend the rest of our lives trying to recover. My article was called Pirates of the Ayahuasca, and when it came out to much fanfare, Ignacio would be ruined, but I would be left living in fear of his powers. Then the ticking started. My face was sewn up. It was not just Ignacio, but the ayahuasca plant itself that hated me. Ayahuasca laughed at me, at my attempts to understand, to empathize, to grieve the earth's conquest, and for having the audacity to be gripped by the fear of its destruction speeding toward me faster than I had thought possible. Ayahuasca was the one tugging this thread on my face, pulling it taut, standing over me. Its message tonight: there is nothing to understand except misery and death and the end of beings, of sound, of sense, of all beauty. My life was a selfish joke. My desire to express myself was risible. I had come here to find hope, but what I found instead was the definitive end of it. Close quote. I mean,
Jesus.
I can't believe you kept drinking it.
Well, I actually didn't, that was the 6th night. And then the 7th night I had an okay experience. And then on the 8th night, I barely had any because I was like, I just want to get the fuck out of here. I want to get back to like Lima and I want to like go to the Holiday Inn. To be honest, I was like, please God, just like let me get to Lima and survive. But I did have a night where I was like, I could not remember my name. But I in the midst of all this, I have to mention that I could not remember my name the whole time. Like I was just like, and then there was a one night where I couldn't remember what ayahuasca was called. And it was really freaking me out that I couldn't remember like what the plant was called, even more that it freaked me out that I couldn't remember my name. So like, I did experience ego death, but it was like, it was just sort of always like ego death was like sort of the least of my problems. Like every night, as soon as I went under the stuff, I was just like, I couldn't remember my name or like what I was, but it was really scary because I've forgotten my name or who I was like on ketamine before. I take ketamine sometimes. I love ketamine. Like I actually took ketamine after I did ayahuasca and I was like, this stuff is fucking awesome. I was like,
that's our drug. It comes from the earth. All right. Like,
does ketamine come from the earth? I mean, I guess everything comes from the earth, right?
It comes from a lab, which is like the earth to us here in the West. That's the way to go. Sorry.
Yeah. Ketamine was just such a bad. I was like, I don't remember my name. And that's great. But on ayahuasca, I was like, I don't remember my name. I was like terrified. And I also did see a lot of, I think I talk about this in the piece. I saw so many images from my childhood. Like it just shuffled. And it was like on pages. And it was like really like, ugh. It was like this horrible sound of like shuffling and like just slides of like, just sort of like the innards of like every home I'd ever been in as a kid. And like just people's plates and like the inside of people's refrigerators and like people's bathroom rugs. Yep. And I interpreted it later as just sort of like, it was just sort of like American like stuff. I don't know. It was weird. I did not enjoy it. I do want to talk about some point about like, I guess the sort of transference aspect of the shaman, which was like, when I was there, I was extremely freaked out by the Icaros, like the sound of them and the shaman. And like, I did feel like this judgment from him and this fear about like how our position as like Westerners to the place. But coming away from it later, I realized, I think that was pretty much my own projection. Not that they're not making money off of people, because they literally are. Like we pay, people go there, they pay them and they take the money. But like, I feel like the sinister nature of it was my own like self-hatred just like that people have towards themselves because they're humans. And then like my like white guilt kind of self-hatred kind of stuff being kind of, I don't know, worked upon.
I feel like this sort of combination of like set and setting, but also expectations and narratives and what you're bringing into these experiences is so important, both in the sense that it's like you're having an experience. It feels like one of those times you hit like slideshow in Apple Photos and there's this shitty music over it. You're like, oh no, turn it off. And it's still coming.
This is like 400,000 times worse than that. But anyway,
yeah. Or you feel like you're in an Eli Roth movie kind of situation where you're like, are we going to get eaten or something, right? Or people's faces are melting. Like that's sort of like, but these are all things that you kind of already have at hand, you know? And I keep thinking, just to really underscore this, and now I'm going to date myself and reveal some things about me, like for a period of time, about half a lifetime ago, I was very, very interested in psychedelics, right? And both theoretically, practically, and otherwise. And among other things, read both of Alexander Shulgin's P-Cal and T-Cal books, right? Those weird, like, they're half chemistry manuals, half bad, like romance novels, whatever, but it's full of trip reports. And one of the things I most remember about this was some bizarre like entactogen or like downstream ethnobotanicals and whatever the fuck it was. But the point is, they, in this lab in the Bay Area, they gave half of the people taking it this drug, and they're like, go out to Dolores Park or like on the Haight or something. And then the other half had to stay in the lab. And half the people came back and they were like, it was just nice. The trees seemed to breathe a little bit more. The wind was in our hair. Someone was, smoking a cigarette. It just smelled magnificent. And it was a beautiful day. And we just felt so close and calm. Mm-hmm. And then every other fucking person who had been staying on site was like, had this weirdly invariant experience of being like, I was kidnapped by a group of aliens that looked like praying mantises, and they all wore lab coats, and they kept asking me fucking questions and looking at me while I was having the worst experience of my life and the linoleum was melting. I'm like, yeah, go fucking figure, right? I mean, one thing is a nice day on the Haight. The other thing is you're being surrounded by a bunch of grad students who are like probing you. Like,
yeah,
no shit. This seems like it has a lot to do with this sort of the relational transferences that were happening. One with the figure of the shaman, who I think is really interesting. And I want to know if he smoked at all, because one thing I've been on a kick reading a lot about like esotericism and witchcraft and sorcery and shit. One major feature that gets mentioned by all these anthropologists, some of whom actually do have like really overwhelming experiences in like the Peruvian or Amazonian spaces, where they despite like Michael Tossig and all these figures, like despite what their expectations are, they suddenly go into a hut and choking on nicotine because there's tons of smoke. Like they're always constantly smoking. They then have these experiences. They're like, I can't account for it, right? But then once that goes stateside and it gets sort of new agey, they no longer smoke. Like there's no nicotine in the spirit lodges in, I don't know, like Sedona. But the thing that I'm thinking about in relation to this is like this broader narrative expectation of like, what is the experience that I'm going to get to have, right? Am I going to step outside myself? Am I going to not have the problems that I came in with? Are the problems like that I'm coming in with narrowly mine, or are they collective? But also like, and I almost want to probe this metaphor of like, is my consciousness going to be raised in like some sort of elevated moral sense? Is it going to be pushed downwards? Is it going to like go sideways, et cetera? But also, how does that relate to my expectations of the other people who are there with me, right? Are they going to emerge both healed, but also made better somehow? Like, are they going to leave with something other than what they came in with?
As far as the tobacco thing, this may have been cut out of my piece. I think they do smoke this stuff called mapacho, which is they give you mapacho cigarettes, and they're supposed to enhance hallucinations, but they don't. But I do think that the shamans smoked cigarettes as well, but I cannot remember. But I know that they smoked mapacho like motherfuckers while they were in there, and everyone else smoked it too. And in fact, there was this one Swiss girl that it got cut out of the story a little bit, but she smoked mapacho all the time, and she was just constantly smoking it. And my friend, my really good friend that I met there, who I called Denise in the story, and actually someone recently said to me, "Oh, I know a lot of Denise's. Like, she sounds terrible." And I was like, "That's so weird," because I thought she was amazing, and I never meant to make her sound terrible at all. We didn't smoke at all. Like, and I actually smoke like 2 cigarettes a day or 1 cigarette a day, but I thought I just didn't smoke mapacho, and this girl was constantly smoking, and we were constantly talking, and we had this battle of like, "You're disgusting, you smoke all the time," and she was like, "You're disgusting, like you guys talk too much and giggle too much." So But mapacho is supposed to enhance hallucinations.
Yeah, it has MAOIs. It's a very strong tobacco with a bunch of harmaline compounds in it too. Yeah. So
really?
Yeah. I think it's like about like 8 or 9 times stronger than North American, like Virginia tobacco.
Oh,
and there's some other stuff in there.
Funny.
Yeah.
I did not like it. It's so weird that has because they tell you to not. I was on Wellbutrin before I went, and I had to go off of it. I hadn't been on it for very long, and I don't think it did like shit for me. But like, yeah, you have to clean out your whole like system when you go there. But I feel like ayahuasca is so strong, it like kind of wouldn't really matter where you were doing it, but at the same time, I'm not sure what, I talked to all these, but I have talked to these people that said, oh, I did it. I went to Sonoma and I did it, or I did it in San Francisco. And I felt this real, like, sort of surge of sort of judgment, like, where I was like, why would you I don't know, just like, if I did ayahuasca in Sonoma, I would just be like, that's so fake ass or something, which is absolutely ridiculous. And I don't believe in authenticity, like in sort of any other department of life. Like, I find it like a sort of a ridiculous category. But I don't know. It's such a strong drug that I don't know. It's hard to imagine that once you took it, that you would have any idea where you were. It's kind of like ketamine too. Like, I've taken ketamine just at home, but I just completely like have no idea like where I am. But there is, what is weird though about ketamine versus ayahuasca, because they're both very like ego destroying drugs, is the one thing that when you're on ayahuasca is this is going to last for a long fucking time. And the other thing that when you're on ketamine is this is not going to last for a long time.
Right.
And that is the one thing that you can remember. And I didn't realize this until right now. And there's just this feeling of like, I think there's this feeling of, I think the fact that ketamine is like okay for me, or has been, I've done it like probably 5 or 6 times, like pretty big doses, like at home with like headphones and eye mask and all that. I every single time I've known that it's going to be done soon. And that is like the thing that's a relief. And then I think it's really amazing. So ayahuasca is you take the chacruna plant and the ayahuasca root, the chacruna leaves, I think, and the ayahuasca roots, and you boil them together in this sort of prescribed way for a certain amount of time with a certain amount of water and all this stuff. There's a sort of mythology, I don't even want to say from where, but there is a mythology about how this was discovered. And I should probably know more about that, but I don't. And I feel like it is really miraculous in a certain way that somebody discovered that. But then I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about the ways that we think about like indigenous culture, right? Where people are just sort of generalizing it. And the idea that that's sort of a miraculous thing. But then, like, for example, like the abortion, like a medical abortion is also like this combination of 2 drugs. And like nobody like calls that like miraculous, they're just like, oh, that's science. That's like people doing science. And I don't know, just sort of the way that plants, the whole idea of plants and indigeneity and our sort of like our understanding of these things as concepts and our own like projection onto those things makes the experience have this magical quality that is like partly like we are investing it with that. Like, what's the fucking difference between figuring out that the chacruna root boiled with the ayahuasca, whatever, those 2 plants, what's the difference between that and then discovering like, oh, one of these things like kills the embryo and the other one like dislodges it from the uterus or whatever.
Yeah.
No,
I want to dig like a little bit more into this line of thinking. And I'm also thinking about, you're talking about like how like the dissociative effects, whether of ketamine or ayahuasca, such that you like you're talking about placelessness in this way, which is interesting because like so much about the piece is about place, and specifically about like, you're really embarrassed to be an American throughout this entire piece, but you're also like, this is not a thing you can get away from. And you're especially like very explicitly embarrassed to be an American in Peru looking for help from indigenous plant medicine and from this shaman who like may or may not resent wealthy or comparatively wealthy foreign visitors. And you know, as a reader, I never lost sight of this context. And, you know, we're going to talk a little bit more later about something you and I have texted about, which is about like plants talking to each other and how we share this single woo-woo belief that plants actually do talk to you. Like you have a really complicated relationship with the idea of plant medicine, but there's a lot of respect in the essay for indigenous traditions of psychedelic plant consumption in this continual awareness of like, what does it mean to be someone from the global north who's looking for relief from the awareness of like the devastations of late capitalism and climate change. And you're looking to indigenous traditions for that purpose. So can we like linger here, like unpack this context a little bit and also how it came up like in your experiences as you were just getting at as they called you a pasajero. Is that right?
Yeah. I think this is probably like a corny thing to say, but I did really start to see plants as like my brothers and sisters. Although last night when I was reading this at the N+1 reading, I read the part about how you tell this facilitators a list of things and then they like clean them. Mm-hmm. And I just sort of made this aside, which I hadn't planned on making. I was like, it kind of sounds like Scientology. Like, so like on the one hand, I had, it wasn't like a joke that I had planned, but I just couldn't kind of help but make the association. And it's, how could you not help but make it? Cause it's fucking obvious. But, so I do like, I walk around in the forest and I'm like, I like talk to the plants and I'm like it was really beautiful this spring and we had a fair amount of rain and stuff. And I'm just like, hey, it's really nice right now. Like we should let's enjoy that it's really nice right now. And like, I feel this like sense of grief too. But then I also, and I wrote about this in the story, was like, I had this really intense feeling that plants were just in charge of everything. Like the way that they hold the soil, the way that they shade things, like et cetera, obviously, also photosynthesis, all that shit. And then like I was also reading about these droughts that happened in the 1870s, which were not like, there wasn't yet like a huge carbon buildup, but that they were like caused by like bad farming in some ways, or exacerbated by bad, soil and farming practices. And so, which I hadn't read that at the time, but just like having this super intense sense of how plants are really just sort of the masters of our fate. But then, of course, we were talking about the right wing and their sort of use of psychedelics and how, or their not appropriation, but their the way that that's sort of harnessed.
Yeah, sure.
But like, I'm also aware of like, once you start talking about like nature and like who's in charge, like even if you're talking about plants, I mean, it's better to talk about plants being in charge than like Jordan Peterson being in charge, certainly. But like, just like that, I don't know that like this, that is, once you start talking about nature, like you're getting into sort of dangerous territory. But I think I'm straying a little bit from your question.
Well, I'll gloss one thing just for the listeners, which is to say, the paper that you're referring to is a really good one called by Brian Pace and Neshe Devenot, called Right Wing Psychedelia, Case Studies in Cultural Plasticity and Political Pluripotency.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah.
Recommend. We'll put it in the show notes.
It is. And it's also just very much like, if you just think ayahuasca just like helps people be more in tune with nature, it's just like, not necessarily.
Yeah. Or like makes people more progressive. It's like, actually, like there's a lot of people, like there's a plasticity that is definitely the case. Like your mind may be open, but like what you turn to might actually be like, the thing that got me in reading this was like people who are like taking acid and watching recordings of like Hitler speeches. Like that is also like the sort of demolition of the idea that like if we all just get like really into psychedelics, like we're all going to become more progressive because we're going to be more interconnected.
Just to gloss the paper more granularly, what this term political pluripotency, right? Multiple political potentialities, or the power to go in multiple directions. Yeah. And what the paper essentially does is it surveys some pretty long-standing historical traditions, and you could go back to like Julius Evola and Aleister Crowley and all these other types who are like using mescaline, which apparently you can't get anymore. It's just too bad. But like using mescaline to reconnect with their, that's probably very hard to get. To reconnect with like the Aryans and the Hollow Earth and shit, but also
DM us if you can get us some mescaline.
In any event, it also sort of tracks and summarizes a lot of the, and take them for what they're worth, these different sort of psychological type things about like, are you more invested in authoritarian sort of structures? Are you more likely to relate to others in different ways? Like these sort of, different axes that are sometimes used in experimental settings. But the case it makes, which I think is pretty compelling, and also I think speaks to something that's come up in some of the feedback we've gotten on the podcast, where people are like, are you trying to associate drugs with fascism? And no, the point here, though admittedly with Elon Musk in the headlines and his drug regimen dropping
he's really giving
today,
ketamine a bad name,
is that the point is not that doing drugs in some particular way sends you in some direction. Though, of course, I think we might, the example of Castaneda and others, or like the Manson family, like points that, well, if you're doing drugs in an authoritarian structure run by patriarchal men who want to exploit you, it's probably going to reinforce that. But rather that the drugs they can go in a lot of different directions, but oftentimes what people get from them is what they think they're going to find or where they started from in a different way. And as Pace and Devenote point to, there's an abundance of literature, specifically feminist eco-criticism and critiques of deep ecology, that note that even like the experience of what they describe as like interconnection with nature, though that may ramify for us three and for a lot of people listening as being like, yeah, we're all connected to nature. That's not incompatible with having like a hierarchical vision, right? People can do lots of drugs and be like, oh, this nature is wonderful.
Yeah.
I can't wait to get my slaves
to go actually leave the home.
Or I can't wait for like, you can be getting drunk on your porch in Monticello and be like, I can't wait for my slaves to like continue to slash and burn their way and lay down more tobacco and cotton over here, right? There is this kind of way in which the possibility of connection or like hierarchy or domination is also a type of connection, and that we ourselves may be smuggling in certain narratives about like raising consciousness versus, like as a moral good versus like as something else. And I think that the example of Denise feels like one. It's like, I don't think Denise is a bad person, but in the text, in the story, you're like, this person.
You love Denise. She's like your soulmate, and she works for it's
aerospace,
we should she works for like I assumed it was like Boeing or Lockheed or something like that.
Yeah. I can't even remember the name of the company that she works for, but it's one of the big ones. But I don't know. I kind of like didn't like judge her that much for, I judged her for working there, and then I didn't judge her for working there, because I just feel like we all got to work somewhere. At the end of the week, so the people that worked at the center, a lot of them were quite poor, and at the end of the week, like you tipped these people, or you're sort of, I don't know, not supposed to, but people were sort of talking about it, about tipping them. And one of the guys who had just done ayahuasca for a week, I said, oh yeah, I just tipped the kitchen ladies. And he was just like, I just paid so much money to be here. Like, I'm not tipping anybody or something. And I was just like,
well, you really had your consciousness raised.
What? Yeah, I was like, and not that like tipping is like the be all and end all of everything, but
it's a bare fucking minimum. Really, I don't know.
No, I mean, it's sort of like where it's like, it's sort of where humanity begins with tipping. But I was just really horrified. And then I actually, like, after that, I'd been kind of friendly with him. And after that, I was just like, I'm not that interested in you as a person. I wasn't that interested in you before, and now I'm not interested at all. But I just sort of went a little bit cold to that, because I was just like, you can't fucking give these people $50 fucking dollars. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, I just, it's like, I don't know. It's nothing to you, and it's a lot to them.
It does feel to me like, if you forgive me, just like the experience of interconnection you had with nature, even as we're talking about these things that are about the political and sort of the consciousness stuff. And again, this is what I love about your work. All these things can happen simultaneously, and they're not reduced from one register to the other. It does seem like the experience that you describe with plants, and even like in the end with like pharmacologically potent plants.
Yeah, it's a rose plant, right?
It gives you back as life and as connection what you left Northern California mourning and feeling as an absence or a vanishing.
I did kind of feel like I got what I wanted, which was like, I just really wanted to believe there was something other than what's here.
Mm-hmm.
And when I left, like I did, and I still do. And I believe that there's something other than what's here, but I'm still ambivalent about it. Like there's part of me that's just like, that's ridiculous. But on some level, I do believe there's something beyond this. And I think that I really, because I experienced it.
Yeah.
And so, and I wanted to experience it. I knew I couldn't experience it like on my own, even though I can sort of critique or analyze like what ayahuasca is and compare it to like a drug and kind of question like the ways that we consider its inception, like miraculous versus a drug, which we think of as like science and like innovation or whatever, which is sort of separate from those things. I still do like believe. I do think of like drugs. People do, people doing a lot of drugs right now, doing a lot of hallucinogens and as like, it's a little bit like space travel in the sense that it's just like this sort of desperate bid to escape. So on the one hand, I experience the other side, whatever the fuck that means. And I believe in it, but I know that I'll never stop like interrogating it probably.
Yeah.
That's like why people ask if I do ayahuasca again. And I'm like, I might. And if I did, I'd go back to Peru because I would probably go back to the same fucking place unless they would let me go there.
You tipped, so I think that they will.
Oh, I don't know, but I would go back there, and the reason I would go back there is just to have. It's just like it's why I keep taking more Freud classes, but it's like it's like every time you do it. Although I will say the Freud classes are much by a factor of some billions much more pleasant than taking ayahuasca.
Thank you. My secret is actually that I'm, be right before we go in.
The reason I would go back is to just like feel 10% more sure that there's another side, I don't know. Just like, it's like an incremental initiation into something that you'll never quite buy.
It feels like, and to use terms we kind of used earlier, you're instead of like putting everything into like a fantasies of exploring outer space or fantasies of rediscovering inner space, you're holding space again. And I don't mean, and like, it's both a joke that I'm making, but also it's like, what other metaphors do we have for existing in space with one another, which is the only way we actually do. Right. It feels like something had been exhausted and depleted.
Yeah.
And you had to travel in different ways. Like they're called trips for a reason. And you're back and you're here and you're alive. I know we're grateful for that.
Thank you. And I don't smoke as much pot as I used to because the shaman like hates marijuana. And he was like, it's really bad for you. And I was like, oh, okay, that's good.
No longer from the earth.
He thinks pot like really confuses people, makes them like very confused. And I think that's like, I don't know, it's sort of an aside, but I think that I had like smoked a fair amount of marijuana, even though I didn't know that I didn't. I think it made me like very confused.
I want to historicize this a little bit. And also, one of the things that we do on this podcast a lot is we talk about things in terms of symptoms, right? And Sarah, I know that you often are like, I'm not an expert on anything. I write on all of these things and whatever. But like, I don't know. I think of you as like a cultural critic, right? Like, I think that's one of the things that you are as like, I know like you might describe yourself as a journalist or a writer, but I think we're talking about like cultural symptoms. And there are definitely both historical and legal reasons for, what people are calling the current psychedelic renaissance. Or like I've been reading some articles, they're calling it the psychedelic gold rush because there's an outrageously large number of, like publicly traded companies. Everyone's rushing to make their own like, proprietary version of psilocybin with like one molecule altered or like what the fuck ever. So psychedelics and psychedelic therapies were, they were huge especially in the 60s. this all got shut down. But at that point, it was really associated with the counterculture. And then everything got scheduled. So, there's actually like this rich scientific literature on psychedelic psychotherapy from that time as well. I mean, a lot of it doesn't meet our contemporary like standards, but it's there, and it's like a rich trove, and it's really interesting. I guess what I want to say, and I'm also thinking about a book that we talked about on this show a year or so ago, Ben Fong's book, Quick Fixes, about the history of drugs in America. Like, I don't think it's a reach to say that there are eras that have drugs that are sort of like proper to them. So like, we think about psychedelics in the 60s. We think about Coke in the 80s, Prozac in the 90s. I'm like very deliberately like a la Ben Fong, not separating legal and illegal drugs. And then, the opioid epidemic starting like in the late 90s, early aughts. And, now, I think about, Patrick and I are in our 40s. I think about like what a wildly different landscape we live in terms of like, just like weed being either like decriminalized or sometimes recreationally legal. But also like fentanyl is everywhere. Right. You can go to the bodega and buy a fucking thing of nitrous sold as galaxy gas. And like, we're excited about in terms of therapeutic possibilities for MDMA, for ketamine, for ayahuasca, for psilocybin, for LSD. So I want to ask, and like, this is a totally like I'm just asking you to speculate. Like, why do you think, like, I know you're saying before we escape through psychedelics, but there's a lot of, like, you can use a lot of different drugs to escape. So like, why do you think psychedelics now? Like, why are psychedelics so back now?
I mean, I guess I talked about like, like just like this escape from like this dying planet, which I feel like is part of it. I think like people don't know how to, we've talked a lot today about the right to think things, the right to feel things. And we were talking about being American. I think there's so many layers right now. People have so much ambivalence. They're like, I really want to believe in the government, but I don't believe in the government. I really want to think that I have a future, but I don't feel like I have a future. I really want to work hard, but I feel like working hard isn't like worth it. Like I think people have always had these feelings, but I think they're like intensifying. Yeah. And I think there's like this idea that if you could take a psychedelic, you would take yourself back to some part of yourself that knows something, you know? Because I think people just feel so, I kind of hate it when people talk this way, but like people think this, but I don't know. I guess I can only speak for myself. And what I hear people say to me is like, I feel as if I often do not even know what to start thinking about or what to start feeling about because I'm so overwhelmed and like everything that I think is contradicting the other thing that I think. And even like in terms of sometimes I think, who should I ask about this? And then I just don't even know. And then like the fact that I think that I need to ask somebody makes me feel bad because I'm like, well, why don't you just know the answer? Or like, why do you think that you have to find out from somebody else? And I think like psychedelics provide us with a promise or an illusion that there's like something inside of us that knows.
Yeah.
Like that the subject is supposed to know. And like, we hope that that's maybe us.
Sarah, thank you so much for being with us today and for this incredible essay. If people want more Sarah Miller, where can they find you?
I have a Substack called The Real Sarah Miller. Well, first of all, you should read this story because it's really good.
It is really good, and we are going to link to it.
I had to say, when I finished it, I was like, this is really good. And then Lisa Borst at N+1 made it even better. But it's like the best thing. It's the best thing I've ever written, and it's quite long, but you should read it. Anyway, but then I have a Substack at The Real Sarah Miller. And then I also have written, I just wrote an article about Botox for the New Yorker. And you can just Google Sarah Miller, Nevada City writer. You'll find lots of things that I've written. And I'm starting to teach writing classes. And if you sign up for my Substack, whether you pay for it or not, you can find out about those like essay writing classes. So
thank you so much.
Thank you
so much for having me. And thank you for all the Freud classes, which are I'm starting to understand.
It's a joy to have you on any of them, really, anytime I want. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Bye.
Sarah.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. This has been an episode of Ordinary Unhappiness, a podcast about psychoanalysis, politics, pop culture, and the ways we suffer now. I'm Abby Kluchin, and today I was joined by Patrick Blanchfield and Sarah Miller. This podcast is produced by Dan Yowell. Theme music by Formal Chicken.